This is the Germans from Russia Experience, Episode 13, A Murder Mystery in Rooshian Town, 1896, Part 1. Welcome to the Germans from Russia Experience. I am the creator and your host, Elisa Long Rodriguez, and I am here to inspire you and others to learn anything and everything about your own family heritage by providing information, experiences, and stories about a special group of people, the Germans from Russia. Hello, everyone. I am Elisa, and today I'm be sharing with you part 1 of a story that I have just begun to dig into. In episode 12, I said that I was working on a few big projects of research, and one of those projects being that of building a family tree and finding as many research documents as I could for Reverend Jacob Legler. He came to Fresno, California in 1891 to start the first Volga German church. So I was looking at as many documents as I could find, and recently I was combing back through and I noticed that I didn't have anything but the name of his wife, Maria Christina Beer. So the first place I went to look was the 1900 census, and yes, she was there along with him and their children. Then I went to the 1910 census, and well, Jacob had passed away in 1907, so I'm looking through all of her children's names on different censuses with, some of her married daughters' husband's names and finding them on censuses. I'm trying to find her to see if she's living with one of her children, and I'm not finding her. So I go to find a grave and I'm looking for her and nothing. I'm not finding her at all. So I look at Jacob's Find a Grave page. He has that there, his picture and the dates of birth and death. There's no kind of biography, and there's also no spouse names connected to him. And his headstone is singular. It just has his name on it only. So I'm finding nothing. So on the mystery goes about Maria Christina Beer, who never had that name here in America because she came here married. So I'm still trying to find out anything I can about her. I mean, she had many, many children, who many died, and I'll be telling you all about that later, in infancy, in their 20s, and so on. And so then I went to newspapers, and I thought, well, let me search the first years that the Leglers were here. So I put in my search 1890 to 1930, just for Legler alone. And I did find an article. I can't for Jacob Legler. I can't really say it's an obituary because it does explain that he died of colon cancer at the age of 55 in 1907. I think it says in his home. And I say it's not an obituary because it didn't list his family members, didn't list his wife. It didn't even say when he was born or where he was born or when he died or burial information. It was all about his service to the church as a pastor, which is important information, but still I'm not finding Maria. So I have to put that to the side for now because I wasn't even planning on doing a podcast this week because I have so many things going on, but I came upon something that was so incredibly interesting, and it was a little bit of a sidebar. I won't call it a rabbit hole because it didn't really get me off track. It still involves Jacob Legler in some way. And so I found these huge newspaper articles as I searched for Legler. And the date was Sunday, June 7th, 1896, and this was in the Fresno Morning Republican newspaper. The headline reads, "Triple Murder. Hapless Armenians are ruthlessly slain. Family exterminated. A terrible tragedy near Fresno. Still shrouded in mystery. Hints that it was done to wreak vengeance for wrongs fancied or real. Working on different theories, many things unexplained, further investigation to be made, facts brought out at the coroner's inquest." Yes, that was the entire title of this article, title and subtitles. And I was like, what in the heck? When you search in newspapers for a name, it'll highlight where it's found in that paper. So it was in the text of that paper or this article. And so, of course, I scrolled right up to the title, and this is what I read, and I was intrigued, to say the least, because as I also mentioned in episode 12, true crime podcasts are enjoyable to me. I really like the mystery, and so this is a true crime podcast opportunity right here in Fresno from 1896. Since I've already read all this, I do know, and I'll tell you now, that the actual murder happened just 2 days before this article appeared in the Fresno Morning Republican. And there are probably many, many more. I found 2 articles so far, and when I saw the huge amount of information that's written in here that I'm going to share with you shortly, I said, before I go on any further, I'm going to put this down in audio so that I can build on it. So here the article starts. "A murder which appears to have been as cruel as deliberate as any ever perpetrated in Fresno County was committed by unknown hand between sunset on Friday evening and sunrise Saturday morning. A father, son, and daughter, the only members of an Armenian family, were killed, and up to the present time there is no theory which satisfactorily accounts for the crime, either as to the motive or the manner in which it was done. There are no end of theories, but all except 1 or 2 can be rejected at once as untenable. Stephen Shahhamarian, age 55, Queen Shahhamarian, his daughter, age 30, and Benjamin Shahhamarian, age 18, his son, were found dead at sunrise Saturday morning in a vineyard belonging to Dr. T. R. Mukes, nearly 2 miles southeast of Fresno. Their bodies were discovered by an aged Armenian named Bogadian, who came out to begin his day's work. He did not stay to examine the means by which the parties had met their death, but spread the alarm among the neighbors. The sheriff and coroner were notified, but unfortunately, by the time the officers arrived on the scene, all footprints of the murderer had been trampled out by the people from the vicinity who had assembled. The place where the bodies lay is about 300 yards from the nearest home. It is on the bank of an irrigating canal. The murdered family were 2 miles from their home by way of the road and more than a mile in a direct line, and there is no reason known why they should have gone to that secluded place, and the fact that they were there can be accounted for only on the theory that they were enticed by the murderer to the lonely spot and then killed. Their home was in Peter's edition of Fresno, where they owned a small house and a 5-acre vineyard. While they were not rich, they were by no means poor. They owned their home, and their little vineyard furnished them with all they needed. They were honest and industrious and had not enough money or property to tempt anyone to murder them on that account. No one supposes that they were killed for their money. All theories follow other lines, and it may be stated that there are two distinct theories held by persons who are familiar with the family and the neighborhood. Okay, breaking from the article. This was before the turn of the century. This was before 1900. And what they're describing with the footprints and people trampling them, back in that time, when a murder or something happened, people just came. They came to look, they came to see, and they just went all through the place. So there was no preservation of the crime scene per se, in those times. Very interesting. I don't know that I would want to do that, to go see, my neighbor hanged in their garage or run over by a car or something like that. Back to the article. An arrest made. A cousin of the son and daughter named Daniel Murrian, about 22 years of age, was arrested on suspicion. There are several incidents connecting him with the affair, yet none of them might not reasonably be explained away. He was taken in custody within a few hours after the bodies were discovered. The strongest grounds for suspicion against him is that he was at the house of the murdered people late Friday evening and had supper with them. His actions were construed as suspicious. When arrested, he had a .38 caliber pistol in his pocket, the size of the one which had been used in the murder. This pistol was bloody. He had carried it in the pocket of his new pair of overalls, and in the pocket where the pistol had rested, there was a spot of blood, showing that the revolver had been put in the pocket while the blood was fresh. Okay, breaking again from the article. Holy cow, this is information that is in the newspaper for everyone to read 2 days after this situation happened. Incredible. On we go. In explanation of this, he says the blood is probably that of a chicken, which he shot early Saturday morning. When the officers went to his room in the western part of town, they found a half-dressed chicken. He said he had proceeded that far with dressing it when he received news of the murder, and he dropped everything and went to the scene. The pistol and the bloody pocket will be carefully kept, and the blood will be submitted to a microscopic examination in order to determine whether it is blood of human or of a chicken. And maybe that's about all they could do back then. It is stated by some of the neighbors that young Shermarian some time ago wanted to marry the girl who was killed, and that the father and brother objected. This is put forward as a possible motive, and while it will be duly investigated, it is not the line in which the hardest work at investigation is being done, nor the field which promises the most results. The prisoner was last evening released on his own recognizance. Continuing. Subtitle, There Was Enmity. And I just looked up this word, and it means intense hostility. There are a number of Russians, and let me tell you, in 1896 in Fresno, when they said Russians, they meant Germans from Russia, who live in the vicinity. It is known that some of them have expressed bitter enmity toward the young man who was murdered. About 2 weeks ago, the wife of a Russian named Albert Brandenburg applied to one of the justice courts of this city for a warrant for the arrest of Benjamin Shahamarian, charging him with enticing a 3-year-old daughter of Mrs. Brandenburg. into a barn and grossly abusing her. So we can all imagine what that means. There was no witness except 2 or 3 very small children, and the justice of the peace told the mother that there must be more evidence to secure a conviction, and he declined to issue the warrant. About the same time, a charge was made of a similar nature against young Hamarian by Reverend Jacob Legler, pastor of the German Russian Church in Peter's Addition. A young girl of the minister had been offered gross indignities by the young man. There were other complaints of a similar nature against him, and the Russians were very angry. They had talked among their neighbors that the law would not protect them, and that they need not expect justice from the source, and that the best thing would be to administer a whipping to the young man. These facts were all brought out at the coroner's inquest, and it is said that there is much other testimony of the same kind which will be added when the inquest is reopened next Thursday. It was adjourned till the time in order to obtain testimony of persons who cannot now be found. An examination of the locality and of the positions of the dead bodies, together with the nature of the wounds, and with a few footprints which had been trampled out by the neighbors when the officers reached the scene, it can be determined with considerable certainty how the murder was committed. The father and the son were evidently shot from very close quarters, as is shown by the powder burns surrounding their wounds. Subtitle: The boy shot first. There can be little doubt that the young man was shot first. However, some claim that he was the last one killed. He was shot in the back of the head, and the pistol was held low and aimed upward, as was shown by the bullet passing through his coat collar. The clothing was burned about 1 inch on all sides of the wound. The pistol could not have been more than a foot away when the pistol shot was fired. The indications are that the murderer was walking behind the boy and thrust the pistol against him and fired. The course of the bullet through his head indicated that such was the case. The position of the other bodies and the manner in which they were struck strengthens this supposition. If the murderer and the 3 intended victims were walking through the vineyard and the boy was shot, his father and sister might be supposed to flee. This they eventually did. Their bodies lay 60 feet away and side by side. 3 tracks led from the boy's body to where they lay. 1 track was that of the father, the other of the daughter, and the third was without doubt that of the murderer who was pursuing them. The footprints showed that they were running. The woman was shot nearly in the back of the head. She was killed instantly, and apparently never struggled after she fell. There were no powder burns on her body, and the shot must have been fired from the distance of several feet. The father was shot in the face, the bullet entering near the corner of the eye and ranging downward, passed clear through his head and was found in his hat. Not only was there deep powder burns around the wound, but his hand was burned by powder, as if he had thrown his hands to his face to shield himself from the pistol which he had seen pointed at him as he turned when his daughter fell dead. The hand was not wounded. The bullet made a very large opening where it entered the skull, likewise indicating that it had been fired from very close range. Okay, breaking from the article. So that is about halfway through the first article. Remember, this is 2 days after this happened. This is just an enormous amount of information. I am just intrigued at what may happen on further research. So let's continue. Subtitle: Shot where they lay. None of the bodies had been moved after they fell. The theory advanced early in the day that they had been chloroformed at their home and carried to the vineyard and then shot has nothing to support it. The blood on the ground where each lay shows that they died on the spot. There were a number of persons who heard 3 shots fired in the vicinity about 8 o'clock on Friday evening, and it was taken for granted early in the day that these shots were the ones that ended the lives of the 3 Armenians. But upon further investigation and upon the discovery of further evidence, it is almost certain that the murder was committed later at night. But just how late, nobody has been found who knows. A young man named Freeman says that he was hunting in the vicinity about 8 o'clock and fired 3 times in very quick succession, and it is reasonably certain that the shots heard were his. Particularly is this probable in the face of positive evidence that Benjamin Shahamarian was seen alive in front of his home after 8 o'clock. M. Samorian, a carriage painter, saw the young man and talked to him at 8:30 that evening. Mr. Samorian had his bicycle lamp lit, and he saw the young man's face distinctly and says he could not possibly be mistaken. This, then, would go to prove that the shots fired in the vineyard at 8 o'clock were not those of the murderer. Subtitle: Evidence of later shooting. Perhaps the most direct evidence as to the fatal shooting is that of a crew of 10 Chinamen who were employed in a fruit orchard adjoining the vineyard. They have quarters in the orchard and sleep there. Several of them heard the shooting at 8 o'clock. Later in the night, they were awakened by other shots and at the same instant heard screams, which ceased with the last shot. While they are not positive as to the exact time nor to the number of shots, they are certain that it occurred at a late hour. There yet remains one thing, and a very important one, which has not yet been explained or any hypothesis or theory. It is, why did the murdered family go to that vineyard? More than a mile distance by the nearest route they could follow. They had been at work in their own vineyard all the preceding day, had eaten their supper at home, and had no business in the distant vineyard, so far as can be learned, and they went there at a late and unusual hour. Subtitle: Evidently decoyed. There can be no doubt that they were decoyed there by the person who killed them or by some confederate. They had on their working clothes. An effort was made yesterday to gain admittance to their home in hope that some clue, spelled CLEU, to aid in the solution of the mystery might be discovered there, but the house was locked and no one could be found with a key. It could not be learned whether the family had retired on Friday night and had been called up, or whether they had left their house on the fatal journey before the hour of retiring. New headline or subtitle: The Inquest, a possible motive for the murder discovered. This is still the same article from Sunday, June 7th. The first effort made to secure systematic evidence of the threefold murder was made at the inquest. The officers had put in a busy day at the scene of the tragedy or in following supposed clues, but they had kept their discoveries to themselves. The bodies were brought to the morgue on J Street early in the day, and a large crowd soon assembled on the sidewalk in front of the building. It was found necessary to lock the door and keep the people out. The Armenian citizens of Fresno and vicinity were much excited. They were shocked at the enormity of the crime that had been committed, but they could throw little light on the affair. They assembled in large numbers and discussed it, but couldn't do anything more. Dr. Davidson and Dr. Long held an autopsy between 3 and 4 o'clock, and shortly after 4 o'clock, the inquest began by the selection of the following jurors. All the jurors are listed here: O. M. Thompson, T. J. Hay, R. A. White, J. W. Briscoe, E. R. Smith, and W. A. Umri. District Attorney Snow was present. He had put in the whole day working on the case and had made up his mind as to what lines of investigation would most probably lead to discoveries. The testimony was taken down by stenographer N. H. Peterson. The first witness called was K. M. Niskian, who lives on F Street. He is a rancher and has a lease on the Mukes vineyard where the bodies were found. He had known the dead people for 9 years. They had lived in this country that long. He saw the son working about 4 o'clock Friday afternoon, a short distance from home on a vineyard belonging to the brother of the witness. The father and daughter were not with the son at that time. The distance from the home of the 3 dead people to the place where they were found dead is about 1 mile by the nearest route, and by the road is about 1.5 miles to 2 miles. Subtitle: Result of the Autopsy. Dr. Davidson, who held the autopsy, was next called. He stated that the old gentleman was shot in the right side of his face. There are powder stains where the bullet entered. The bullet passed downward and backward entirely through the head and was found lodged in his hat. The powder burns covered an area nearly 2 inches in diameter. The forefinger and the inside of the right hand were also powder burned. The girl had a bullet wound in the left side of the forehead. The bullet was cut out on the opposite side of the head. She was not powder burned. The young man was shot in the back of the head. The ball did not pass through the head. The bullet taken from the daughter was about .38 caliber. All bullets found were of the same size and apparently from the same pistol. Dr. Davidson's opinion was that the young man was running away and holding up his coat collar over the back of his head as though trying to ward off the blow. He was evidently leaning forward. The shot was fired from so close quarters that it burned the coat. The father had evidently thrown his head forward at the instant the shot was fired and perhaps was in the act of throwing up his hands. The hole made through where the bullet entered the old gentleman's head was very large, as it fired from very close range. Subtitle: Last Seen Alive. The next witness was M. Simonian, a carriage painter of this city, who probably was the last person, aside from the murderer, who saw any of the victims alive. He saw Benjamin Shahamarian Friday evening about 8:30 o'clock near Mr. Peters' gate at the south end of F Street. Mr. Simonian was walking and pushing his bicycle. The light from the lamp fell full on the young man's face, and he was positively recognized. Mr. Simonian spoke to him and received a reply. This was about a block from the young man's home. Mr. Simonian was on his way to attend a young people's meeting in Peter's Addition. When he reached the place where the meeting was to be held, no one was there, and he returned home. He was certain the time could not have varied more than 5 minutes from 8:30. The next called was C. B. Driver, a fruit grower who lives on Cherry Avenue. He heard the shots just at dusk Friday evening. The shots were in the direction of the place where the bodies were found. They were fired about as fast as a man could discharge a pistol. He made no attempt to ascertain who fired them or for what purpose. Shooting is common in that vicinity and attracts but little attention. S. J. Wall, who lives about 500 yards from the place where the bodies were found, was called to the stand. He heard 3 shots about 8 o'clock Friday evening. He was out of doors and was in plain view of the place where the bodies were found. He says he could have seen the shooting had he thought of looking in that direction. There were 2 shots fired very close together, and the third a shot interval afterward. Mr. Shahamarian served in the school election board Friday afternoon. Mr. Wall was at the scene of the shooting about 9:30 o'clock yesterday morning. Okay, this is the last section for the first article. Hear what happened to be some very important evidence as introduced in an indirect way, and it perhaps will satisfactorily show that the shooting about 8 o'clock was not that which took 3 lives. Mr. Wall stated that a crew of Chinamen were at work in the orchard adjoining the vineyard where the murder was committed, and that they heard the shots fired about 8 and heard other shots later in the night, and also heard screams. The testimony of these Chinese was not introduced at the inquest for the reason that it had not been heard of in time. District Attorney Snow will go today to interview the Chinamen and will perhaps obtain pointers which will be useful in future investigations. The next witness was Jacob Legler, minister of the German-Russian Church in the southwestern part of the city. He lives across the street from the home of the murdered family. He can speak but little English, and his son acted as interpreter. The purpose of Mr. Snow's question to the minister was to ascertain if any enmity existed among the Germans and Russians of that vicinity toward the family that was murdered. Although but little information was obtained, it is enough to show that some of the people in that part of town considered that they had just cause for ill will toward Benjamin Shahamarian. The minister said that his own child, a small girl, had been subjected to the most indecent treatment by the young man, and he named other neighbors who had cause for complaint on the same ground. One of these was Mrs. Louise Brandenburg, wife of Albert Brandenburg, who has a little girl less than 4 years old. Mrs. Brandenburg was called to the stand. She speaks English tolerably well. She related the trouble she had with young Shahhamarian and said she had applied to the court to have him arrested, but that the judge told her there was not enough evidence. She then related several conversations she had with neighbors on the subject and said that it was agreed among them that young Shahhamarian ought to be whipped soundly and that the preacher said he ought to have a good thrashing. Mr. Brandenburg was in San Benito County at the time, and he came home a few days ago. Mrs. Brandenburg stated that her husband was at home Friday night and was in bed shortly after 8 o'clock. She said there was some sort of meeting that night in the Russian shanty, which is used as a schoolhouse, but she did not know who was there or what was the purpose of the meeting. She had seen a light in the shanty and had walked near it to see if her boy was there, but had seen no one. This ended the testimony. The inquest will be resumed next Thursday at 8 p.m. Wowza. That's some kind of news article. I guess, people didn't have computers and social media or even TV or anything like that, so they spent hours reading the newspaper each day. Yeah. So I was planning to read to you the second article, which came out 2 days later. It does have a lot of the same information, but there is some new things in there. But from the length of this episode, I really want to save it because I want to do some more research on this incident and find out as much as I can about this very interesting story. I hope you enjoyed it. Goodbye. Thank you for listening to the Germans from Russia experience. I hope that something you heard today will inspire you to learn anything and everything about your own ancestors. If you like what you heard, please leave a review, like and share this podcast. You can comment directly by emailing me at thegermansfromrussiaexp@gmail.com. Also, like my Facebook page, The Germans from Russia Experience Podcast. Please see my show notes for website suggestions to begin or continue your discovery of your Germans from Russia roots and about this episode. My podcast artwork is by Matt Wall. I received technical assistance from my friend Annie Anderson.